Hey all, welcome to the Santa Barbara live stream as part of Earth Day Live 2020. We hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy during these times. We're really sorry that we can't be with you in person, but obviously understanding that everyone is sheltering in place right now and practicing social distancing. We're just really glad that we can come together digitally in this way. My name is Emily Williams. I am on the steering committee of 350 Santa Barbara. 350 Santa Barbara is the local grassroots chapter of the international organization 350.org. Here in Santa Barbara County, a lot of our efforts focus on 4 interrelated projects. Number 1, focusing on keeping new fossil fuels in the ground to avoid catastrophic climate change. Number 2, working to support a just transition to an economy based on renewable energy. Number 3, working on moving the money away from fossil fuels and toward those climate solutions that support communities, workers, and future generations. And number 4, building an inclusive, diverse, and empowered climate justice movement here in the county. Now, all of that, of course, is a very tall order, so we don't do any of this work alone. We work in coalition with about a dozen other environmental, climate, and social justice organizations, and we'll give you an introduction to them at the end of this. So we have a short program prepared for you today. We wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of what we're covering, and then we'll jump into it. So we're going to start by doing a quick grounding of 2020 and what we've been thinking about as the intersections between climate change and coronavirus. We're then going to transition into an introduction to climate justice organizing in Santa Barbara County, all the things that are going on here, give you some ways to get involved, some save the dates and things to watch out for. And then finally, last but not least, we're going to end with a deep dive look at one of the proposed oil projects up in the northern part of the county. And this is a webinar put together by one of our partners, the Environmental Defense Center. So with all that, let's jump in. So I think we need to start first by setting the stage in 2020. It's surreal to say the least, I think, for many of us, that here we are celebrating Earth Day, right, at the same time as in the midst of a global pandemic, and also at the same time that we have a federal administration that is using that pandemic to undermine some of the very legislation that came out of that first Earth Day. While the coronavirus continues to threaten our families, our communities, and society at large, the climate crisis continues, right? So we have this pandemic and this crisis that we're facing at the same time, and it can feel really overwhelming. Not to make it more overwhelming, but just as a quick reminder of where we're at, I want to share with you all something which I think is helpful to keep in mind how long we have. So this here is called the carbon clock, and it shows you, in order to keep global average temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, generally recognized as a safe limit, how much time we have left with the current rate that we're burning carbon, that we're producing carbon dioxide. And as you can see, we're looking at less than 10 years. And so, for instance, the IPCC, the leading authority on climate change, had a report that came out a couple of years ago. And ultimately what we're looking at is we have 10 years left in which we need to cut global emissions in half in order to avoid some of the worst effects of climate change. At the same time, in response to the coronavirus, we have, for instance, the EPA has temporarily suspended pollution regulation. Some states have pushed through laws to criminalize fossil fuel protests. And in our very own state of California, Governor Newsom's administration, who's been doing a great job with coronavirus, at the same time has authorized 24 new fracking wells earlier this month. Despite the horrors of this virus, or maybe in addition to things that we need to be thinking about, in this moment, we cannot turn our attention away from the climate crisis. If we do, we will surrender the precious little time we have left to fight the very real possibility of leaving our children with an uninhabitable earth. Our current administration, understandably, which is a really, really good thing, is focused right now on flattening the curve, and we need to flatten that curve for the coronavirus. For the last 30 years, though, we need to remember that the fossil fuel industry has thwarted every attempt to flatten the deadly curve, that increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And as a result, now we are faced with this seemingly impossible task that we have to face both a global pandemic and a global climate crisis. What's more, bringing these things together is we know that there's an economic recession that's coming, and in some ways is very much already here. More people have lost their jobs in the last few weeks than at any time since the Great Depression. Our systems are so incredibly interconnected, and the pandemic has revealed just how very vulnerable they are. If we're going to survive both this virus-induced economic shock and the climate shocks that have already arrived with things like the Thomas Fire and will keep arriving with continued climate change, we need a massive economic recovery plan. We need a just transition, a green recovery plan, a Green New Deal, whatever you want to call it. We need some sort of recovery plan that's going to be addressing these things all in one package together. So here in Santa Barbara, we need that lesson as we really have our work cut out for us. So let me take you on a quick whirlwind tour of what all this means here for our local context and some of the work that's been going on to address this stuff in really promising ways. So first of all, many of you already know the context. I want to start with a quick history or maybe a reintroduction to Santa Barbara County. But before we even start with the 1969 blowout, the oil spill, we need to remember that the reason that there's even extraction taking place here in the first place, here and across the United States, is because that this is colonized land. Fossil fuel extraction and climate change could not exist on the scale that they currently do exist without the process of colonialism. This is where a lot of the coal, oil, and gas has been dug up, as in other areas of the world that have been colonized. So we are here, sitting here in the ancestral territory of the Chumash. And the Chumash, there's several different bands, and they've been doing a lot of work really at the forefront of this climate and environmental justice movement. So fast forward a little bit, a lot of you then know this part of the story. 1969, there was an oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara. In reality, it was more like a blowout. It happened on Union Oil's Platform A. And it was shocking at that time to see pristine beaches, usually covered in wildlife and surfers, and so shocking that it led to action in a way that previous spills had not. You know, that perhaps in the fact that it was the biggest to date. This blowout, this oil blowout, led to the very first ever environmental studies program at UC Santa Barbara, and it led to the very first Earth Day in 1970. It also contributed to things like the public pressure and support for the formation of the EPA and NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. So really, over the past 50 years, Santa Barbara has become known as a place of environmental activism, and understandably, there's been a lot of things that have come out of here. Santa Barbara County, however, has also continued this deep relationship with the oil industry. So let's take a look at this map. I know it's a little bit hard to see and make out, but the things that I want you to take away first of all is zooming out California. California, as it turns out, is one of the top producers of oil in the United States. Depending on the year that it's ranked, it's either number 3 or number 4. And while the stats change a little bit, depending on whether or not you include offshore oil extraction or just onshore, Santa Barbara County and Ventura County just to the south are some of the biggest oil producing counties in California. We're just behind counties like Kern, Los Angeles, and Monterey. And it's important to remember that on the Central Coast, in this area of the foundation or the beginning of Earth Day, we have a lot of oil that's being produced here. So you can see in these green and purple boxes that a lot of this oil is offshore oil, but also quite a bit of it is onshore. You can see that with all the pipelines really, and the various rigs on shore. And another thing to know about this oil is very heavy, it's very viscous, and it's highly polluting. It takes a lot of energy to get out of the ground, and it has a lot of emissions associated with it when it's burned. So there's a lot of proposals now to reopen up some of the offshore drilling and to do new drilling in the northern part of the county. And this is all at a time when the International Energy Agency has said that to avoid catastrophic climate change, we cannot build any new fossil fuel infrastructure. So any new projects that are approved at this point would be going above what scientists have said would be the safe amount produced in terms of climate. So for instance, if the northern county projects were all built, it would triple how much oil we're currently producing here in the county. So a lot of the work that we're doing as 350 Santa Barbara with our coalition partners is ensuring that new fossil fuel development is not built, which would lock in climate chaos. The other thing that I want to point out is that when we're looking at this, when we're looking at environmental activism and oil production, the energy map, Santa Barbara County as a whole, we're looking at a lot of inequalities. So most of the onshore extraction, again, is located in this northern part of the county. If those projects were approved, they would be drilling through the aquifer that provides drinking water to 200,000 people up in Santa Maria. And Santa Maria is primarily a people of color community. There's a lot of folks there who work, some in the oil industry, a lot of them working in the agriculture industry. Now, if that's not enough for you, really almost no matter where you're watching this, if you're in the US, you get a lot of your produce from Santa Barbara. So strawberries, broccolis, grapes, wine grapes, for the wine production comes from this county. In Ventura County, a lot of the production, you get celery, avocados, and tomatoes. You have farm workers to thank for that. And these farm workers are the same farm workers who had to work in the middle of ash falling from the sky from the Thomas Fire without personal protective equipment, PPE. And organizations like Cause had to actually go out into the fields and provide this PPE for farm workers when the industry wasn't providing it to them. These are the same farm workers who, as essential workers right now, are still working right in the fields, producing their food, oftentimes without access to that PPE. These can also be the same people who are exposed to the toxins of oil drilling. A lot of oil drilling happens in California in fields. In case you didn't know, throughout California, you'll get a lot of areas of crop production where there's oil rigs actually in those fields, or the crops are watered with wastewater. And this happens especially in Kern County, just inland. Meanwhile, then you have this new study that came out of Harvard, which illustrates what many already knew to be true. The communities that are the most impacted by industrial air pollution, who are breathing in that heavy smog, experience higher rates of mortality when they contract coronavirus. So what this all means is when we're talking about who is bearing the brunt of things like oil extraction, who's being most impacted by coronavirus, they tend to be the most vulnerable in our communities. And also they're the most essential workers. They're the people who are providing us with food. So facing all that, then what can be done? We've had some really great success stories here in Santa Barbara, and while there's a lot of work left to be done, we wanted to share a few of them. And to start off, given that today is Divestment Day, focused on moving the money, we wanted to share our success with divestment stories first. So Bill McKibben in 2019 wrote an article titled, "Money is the Oxygen on Which the Fire of Global Warming Burns." A mouthful, but there was never a truer statement said. Indeed, when you think about it, oil companies, gas companies could not be exploring for new fossil fuel reserves if they were not getting the financial backing. And financial backing often comes from banks. It comes from investments from entities like universities, from cities, from pension funds. And so one of the big wins was the University of California, where we have the local UCSB campus, divested in 2019 from all the major oil, gas, and coal companies, which was a huge win. In 2017, Santa Barbara City Council divested from banks that were funding the Dakota Access Pipeline, that pipeline that was cutting through the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. And these banks included Wells Fargo and Goldman Sachs. The effort was led by the Santa Barbara Standing Rock Coalition, which is this local group of both Indigenous people and allies, which we were able to support. So these are two examples of real efforts that where campaigns were launched and then won to move the money out of that continued extraction. And then also in terms of keeping fossil fuels in the ground, recently PetroRock, which is one of the three companies proposing to drill oil up in the northern part of the county, withdrew its application. So here in Santa Barbara County, people have been working for a long time to fight climate change and build this climate justice future. Recently, and this is more than talking about things of how do we build a just transition together, folks have been talking a lot more about this 50th anniversary as the rebirth of the environmental movement. Or perhaps putting it more accurately, taking leadership from those communities who have been fighting environmental struggles in their communities for decades, and using that, learning those lessons to perhaps have the birth of mainstreaming the environmental justice movement. In Santa Barbara County, what this has looked like is starting a conversation of what climate justice and a just transition might look like in our county. As the Climate Justice Alliance says, the transition is inevitable, justice is not. While the pandemic continues, though, politics and industry continues as well. And when the economic recession hits from coronavirus, we're going to need to support transition out of it in a way that is socially, environmentally, and economically just. So the first step for us has looked like working and taking leadership from other folks and having conversations between social justice organizations, traditional environmental organizations, and labor. And we're in the early days of working with coalition partners to build those stronger networks and start planning out and visioning together policies, actions, things that we can be doing to build that just transition in our backyards. So all of that said, there's a lot of ways that you could be getting involved. There's a lot of upcoming things that you should keep an eye on. So if you go to 350 Santa Barbara or 350sb.org/Earth Day Live 2020, that URL at the top, you'll find links to information such as an upcoming webinar, which is going to give a much deeper look at oil production in Santa Barbara County. There's also a lot of oil projects that are coming up, including Arrow, which is one of the ones up in North County, and Exxon, which is a proposal to truck oil up Highway 101. When those projects come to the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission, there's going to be an opportunity to make your voice heard. Additionally, we feel very strongly about this. For folks whose economic situations have not changed at all, you can consider redistributing your stimulus check and giving it to those folks who have been most hard hit by coronavirus. And we also have a list of some suggested places where you can be giving that money on the website as well. Finally, you can go to 350 Santa Barbara or 350sb.org and sign up for our newsletter. And then that way you'll get in your inboxes updates whenever major actions are coming up. You'll also find a link to a lot of our coalition partners, including Food and Water Watch, Los Padres Forest Watch, Sierra Club, Los Padres Chapter, Community Environmental Council, CAUSE, many, many others as well. So with all that being said, we thank you very much for listening to this part of the webinar. Now, if your taste was just piqued and you're very interested in hearing about more fights that are going on, stay tuned. Next, we're going to be screening a webinar from EDC, which is going to give a detailed rundown of one of the most relevant oil projects that is upcoming in June. This oil project is ERA, which is the one that will be coming in front of the Planning Commission in June. And if it was approved, it would be leading to over 200 new oil wells drilled in the county. All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.